Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions, and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently now. In Season 2 of the Thriving Leaders podcast, I'm interviewing thought leaders from around the world to pick their brains on what it takes to build a thriving team. This is helping me write my second book, Thriving Teams, which will be out later in the year in 2025. I hope you enjoy the podcast. So if you've ever wondered why some people light up a room while others completely lose the room, Gabrielle Dolan is here to explain why it all comes down to the power of story. Gabrielle's a global authority in strategic storytelling and real communication, and she's spent her career showing some of the world's biggest brands, from Amazon to Salesforce and even the Obama Foundation, how to lead with authenticity, connection, and clarity. So Gabrielle began her journey at the National Australia Bank, which is also where I started my career as well. And she soon realised that storytelling was really, really powerful for leaders, and this changed the course of her career. I was actually lucky enough, my first experience of Gabrielle was when she facilitated a storytelling training course when I worked at NAB, but when she had left NAB and she was actually facilitating the program. So I've actually experienced the power of learning from her too. Today, she's a sought-after keynote speaker, an educator, and a best-selling author of 9 books, including her upcoming release, Story Intelligence: The Craft of Authentic Storytelling Made Smarter with AI. She's also the force behind the top-rated podcast, Keeping It Real with Jack and Rel, and the founder of the global movement, Jargon-Free Fridays. Welcome, Rel.
I am very excited to be here to talk about all things storytelling.
Awesome. So for those, I'm familiar with your Jargon-Free Fridays, but what does that actually mean? And what is Jargon-Free Fridays for those people who might not be familiar?
Yeah, the Jargon-Free Fridays, it came about, it was a bit of a fun project, actually. There's real consequences to the way we communicate when we use jargon and unnecessary acronyms. And I had a client once, she sent me this, like something about acronyms, and she sent it to me, and it just happened to be Friday morning. And she said something like, maybe we should try to not use jargon for one day. And I went, oh, well, that could be. And it was because it was a Friday. I thought, what if we just tried for Jargon-Free Friday? So look, I got some really funny videos made up, and there's a website, but it really is, it's just a fun way to raise awareness to the consequences when we use excessive jargon and excessive acronyms, because either people don't understand what we're saying or misinterpret what we're saying, because for every single acronym you use, there are multiple variations of that same acronym. I think it leads to miscommunication. I'm all about how do we communicate with clarity, and one way is to use stories, and another way is to reduce the amount of acronyms and jargon we use.
I love that. I feel like we used to joke when I worked at NAB, which is obviously an acronym for National Australia Bank as well, about having a TLA, which is a 3-letter acronym for a TLA, because that's just how we spoke in acronyms all the time. So if you're new to the team, understanding what was going on is pretty hard.
Yeah, I remember I worked at NAB for a long time, and I started my career in IT, and I remember it was like mainframe computers, and I had to ring IBM to get a replacement for the fan. So I'm looking up fan and I couldn't find the model number. So I had to ring them, and they said, oh no, it's not under fan, it's under A. For what? And it was air movement device. And it was, oh, you are kidding me. You're kidding me. So that was back in the late 80s. That was my first introduction to how ridiculous unnecessary acronyms are.
Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar with your work, I'd love for you to share your story. You're a storytelling expert, and why the work that you do is so important too.
Yeah, well, like you said, I started at National Australia Bank, and I worked at NAB for almost 20 years, starting in technology, but then moved into designing leadership programs and delivering. But my last few years at NAB were in change management roles. So I sort of had 2 hats. I was a senior manager, so I led people. So I had a leadership role, but I also had a change management role when we were rolling out major projects across NAB. And what I started to notice is that when I shared a story, the message seemed to get across better. And especially in the change management role, look, it wasn't a silver bullet, but people seemed to sort of understand why the change needed to happen more. And I just had more success in communicating the reason for change when I shared a story. And I started to notice that some of the really good leaders that I thought, God, I wish I worked for them, were sharing stories. And you'd go see presenters and you'd walk away thinking they were brilliant presenters, but you didn't know why. You just knew they were really good. And when I looked at it, it was like, because they were sharing stories. I sort of thought there's something in this. I think storytelling is a leadership skill. And like any other skill, I think it can be taught and learnt. I left NAB nearly 21 years ago to teach leaders how to communicate more effectively through story, because I think it is one of the most powerful and authentic and effective ways that we can communicate. And whether it is in a leadership role or in a sales role or just teaching moments with your kids, it's a powerful way to communicate.
Yeah, definitely. I've actually just come off the growth faculty session with Stephen Bartlett, so the Diary of a CEO.
Yep.
And my one takeaway, well, there were several takeaways, but observing him tell stories, like every question that they asked, he had a story to tell about to explain the message that he was trying to demonstrate. And then the final question that Holly Ransom actually asked him was about his ability to tell stories. And the thing that he said was, it is the most powerful thing that anyone can do is tell a good story. And so I think that's a skill that maybe we don't always focus on. Like people talk a lot about communication, but don't necessarily talk about storytelling explicitly.
Yeah, I know, I agree. And I think you can talk about the communication and influencing, but the most powerful way you can communicate and influence is through a story. I'm a massive fan of Scott Galloway and his podcast Pivot with Kara Swisher. And he will say, when people ask me, what is the one skill young people should learn? And he says storytelling. Like literally, that is the most important skill you could learn because it's so powerful and effective in so many different situations.
Yeah. So is there, like, as a parent, is there sort of skills that we should be teaching our kids to help with them be better storytellers?
I wouldn't say as a parent, teach your kids storytelling. I would say use storytelling because there's teaching moments. And there's a saying that says experience is the best teacher, but storytelling is the second best teacher. And when you think of something about our kids, we don't want them to have to experience everything to learn something. You sort of want to experience some stuff, but you still also want to protect them. And so sharing a story can actually give them the experience, the learnings of an experience without necessarily going through the hard, tough experience. And that's what we want to do as parents. And I think sometimes as parents, we intuitively share stories because we know how powerful the message is, but then we get into business and we sometimes don't realize that. Just to share an example, and this is going back 20 years ago, we got a swimming pool at home and it wasn't a very big pool, right? It wasn't a very big, and the kids were quite young. They were like four or five. And there was a rule that when they had lots of friends over, they weren't allowed to jump in the pool because it just wasn't big enough for people to be jumping in the pool. Now, instead of me just telling them that, I shared this story about when I was a kid. I was in our pool and Auntie Allie, so their auntie, jumped in the pool next to me and her knee hit my tooth and it broke my tooth off. And I'm going, she got so much in trouble off Nana. She got in so much trouble. And they just kept asking me to retell that story. I think they thought it was pretty cool that their big auntie was getting in trouble off Nana. And I remember it would have been like about 5, 6, 7 years later, they had friends over for a swim and they were telling them the rule, we're not allowed to jump in the pool. And they retold that story. And like this was years after I'd shared it with them. And I was just like, oh my God, this stuff really does work. It makes your message understood and makes it memorable.
It's probably also a good data point to be like, has my message landed when you hear other people retelling your story, that you know that it's actually resonated and the message is being heard.
Absolutely. A lot of people say, how do you know your story worked? And look, sometimes you don't. Just like when we communicate now, we're not sure if our message, our communication has worked. But yeah, if you might have people say, yeah, I really like that story. But when you hear people referring to that story or retelling it, that's when you know it absolutely has worked.
Yeah. So for our listeners, a lot of our listeners are leaders. So what are the types of stories that leaders should be telling?
Yeah, look, I discuss in my book the four types of stories you could share. And very quickly, one's parables, like Aesop's fables and stuff like that. One is public story. So in the public domain, it could be stories about case studies or Steve Jobs or things that have happened. The other two, and these are the two most important, I think, are professional stories. So these are things that have happened to you, but they're in a work context, and then personal stories. So they've happened to you, but that has not been at work. And personal stories are the absolute most powerful stories leaders can share, but they're the most underutilized. Basically my whole work for the last 20 plus years has been teaching people the power of sharing non-work related stories, but connecting it to a work message. And sometimes a work message, a lot of the times around values. So you could have your company values, say integrity, but share a story about integrity, what that means to you, but not a work related one. The research shows that when we hear a story like that, so first of all, we hear a story, we connect to the message, but when it's a personal story, we actually connect to the storyteller.
Mhm.
And that has the ability to not only fast track a relationship, but strengthen an existing relationship. So when you think about it as a leader, yeah, you want to share a story to communicate more effectively, like tick, yeah, good job, well done. But if you're a leader and you're sharing a personal story, it's actually strengthening the relationship with your people. So when you think about it, that is priceless. You could do it just for that. So and I often say with salespeople, or if you work with stakeholders on a long-term project, you're sharing personal stories that are strengthening the relationship. But also if you're meeting people for the first time, and this is why it's really powerful in sales as well, that it's fast tracking a relationship.
Why do you think leaders find it so challenging to share some of their personal stories? Because what I imagine it does is it builds trust, you're role modeling vulnerability, you're kind of getting to know each other on a human level. So I see there's lots of benefits to that. But I do notice that people can feel quite reluctant to want to share that part of themselves as well, but also wanting to make it relevant. Because I have also heard or observed as well where some leaders like to, oh, back in my day and share this story that's not really relevant, but they're wanting to kind of just share a yarn about something that is interesting to them, but maybe not relevant to the situation. So, how do people really unlock what are personal stories that they should share and why are people so resistant to it?
Yeah, and there is resistance. And there's resistance for several reasons. One is like a very simple level. People think, why would anyone be interested in my personal stories? And works, personal, don't mix the two. They almost see it as not professional. So that's one reason. And I think part of the work I do, what I love, is like, no, you should be doing it because it's really effective. So giving them permission. The other thing is they don't know how to link those stories. So they don't know how to link a non-work related story to a work message. And I see that often when people try it without learning the technique is they tell a story and then people walk away going, what the hell was that about? It's like, so they haven't linked it properly. And you touched on vulnerability. Sometimes there's a bit of vulnerability. Now, not all your stories need to be vulnerable. And when I say and vulnerability isn't about crying or oversharing or getting people crying. It could be literally, I spoke before about you want to share a value of integrity, like share a story when you haven't lived that value. And even doing that can be and can show some vulnerability. There's a lot of reasons why we don't do it. We've sort of been taught all our life that you just got to report information because that's professional. We've been told that showing vulnerability is a sign of weakness, but if you're a fan of Brené Brown's work, you'll realize that's not the case. And sharing stories in a work situation takes courage. It takes capability, like the skill of how to do it, but then it does take courage to do it. Because you know what? It's just easier to be a reporter. It's easier to just not share a story. It's easier to just stick with figures, facts, logic. It's so much easier to do that. It's just not as effective. So I ran a workshop last week and I was talking to someone in the break and about this, and they went, so you can choose with your story, with your communication, you can choose it to be easy or effective. And I went, that's in a
Yeah.
nutshell, that's what it is. If you're not sharing a story, you're choosing easy, but you're not choosing effective.
Yeah. And I feel like it's one of those muscles. Like once you start sharing stories, it becomes more natural. So eventually, hopefully, it would become easier as well. But it's almost that limiting belief that it has to be hard to tell stories and that it requires you to show some vulnerability. You mentioned that some people might not think that their stories are interesting enough. What advice do you give to leaders to kind of break through that paradox of thinking that their story is not interesting?
Yeah, so I actually, well, I give them advice and say that people do relate to that's normal. But what I do is I actually, in the workshops, I take them through the framework and the process and all that and get them to share these stories. And so they'll break into small groups and they share a story. And all of them are thinking, oh, my story's pretty boring. It's just sort of like every day. No one would be interested. Most of them are thinking. And then they share their story. And the first thing I say is, tell me what you liked about that. And they said, it was so interesting listening to other people's stories. It was like so interesting. But they all thought their stories would be boring. And the other thing I see, what else do you like about that? And they feel they get to know each other a little bit better. And then they talk about, they feel it strengthened the relationship, that there's a connection there that wasn't there before. So I don't give them advice. I get them to experience the power of it. And then hopefully once they've experienced how powerful it is, they're more willing to give it a go out in the real world outside of my workshops.
Well, it's probably similar to what you said when I asked the question about as a parent. It's almost like they need to experience it themselves and for others to role model it to see the power and impact that it does have.
Yeah, absolutely. And like parenting, also like in coaching, in work situations, coaching or mentoring people, a lot of the times, and with your kids, you don't want to be telling people exactly what they be doing, but like sharing a story provides an insight and a different way to think of things. And then people can take action or not from that.
So for leaders, what are some overlooked opportunities where they should be telling stories and potentially aren't?
I think some of the most effective ways to share, or the best environment to share stories in, is when you're communicating values. So whether it's the company values or your own leadership values, I truly believe that you can't communicate values without stories. Yes, you can communicate values by living and breathing them so people understand your values over a long time, but you need stories to communicate. And the vast amount of work I do is go into organizations when they're rolling out values rollouts and how you communicate them through story. So communicating values is a really, I think, an overlooked way of storytelling, whether that's to your team, rolling out like values rollouts, or to your clients or potential clients. And I work with a lot of professional service firms that are going in pitching for work. And they understand that they're pitching for work and they've got probably 3 or 4 competitors that are sort of pitching 95% the same. And the only thing that's going to make a difference is if they share a story about the importance of a value, that the potential buyer walks away going, I'm not sure what it was, but I think we could work with them, because we buy on emotion. So I would say to people, especially when they're pitching and talking to like salespeople or their team, what's important to their team? What's important to your salespeople? And if it is, say it's things like transparency of information or trust that they'll have your back, there's a story about that, because you can say, oh, as a leader, my door's always open. Like, how many times have we heard that? It was like, so what? Like, seriously, compared to other leaders that are going, my door's never open, right? They're just words, but it's only through a story that people really know you believe it. So do you want to hear an example?
Yeah. Tell me a story.
Yeah. Well, I did some work with, it was actually National Australia Bank. This was about 11 years ago, so I eventually left. And it was when they were rolling out new values. And so I was running workshops for the top 200 plus leaders. And one of their values was doing the right thing. At the time, they was doing the right thing. And I ran a workshop, and there was a woman in the workshop called Anne. And so I take people through the process, go, well, what does doing the right thing mean to you? So that's the first step with storytelling. You got to be really clear on the message. So it's things like, she goes, oh, it's about telling the truth. It's about, if you say you're going to do something, do it. I sort of keep asking them, what else does it mean? And she went, oh, it means doing the right thing all the time. She goes, I think we're really good at doing the right thing when it suits us, but when it doesn't suit us, that's where there's a challenge. This is the story she came up with in the workshop. And this is, like I said, it's about 11 or 12 years ago. She still shares it to this day because she knows how effective it is. So the story goes, in the early 60s, my dad was a professional swimmer. And he reached the point where he tried out for the national swim team. And it was on the day of the meet, and he was in his race, and he got to the end to do the tumble turn, and he misjudged, so he missed the wall. Now, this was in the early 60s, so there was no sensors in the wall. There was judges, but with all the splashing and kicking, he knew they wouldn't know if he touched the wall or not. So he had to make a split-second decision. Does he go back and touch the wall, or does he just keep swimming? And he decided to go back and touch the wall. Now, you don't recover from a race when you do that. And Dad did it. And there was probably a whole lot of other reasons, but Dad never made the national swim team. And growing up as a kid, I would often hear Dad share that story, and people would ask him, have you ever regretted going back and touching the wall? And he would always say, I've never regretted that, because if I didn't go back and touch the wall, I know I'd have to spend the rest of my life knowing I did the wrong thing. And I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me of our value doing the right thing. It's only a matter of time before we will come across our own go back and touch the wall moment. And I invite you to consider what my dad would do. That's going to have a different impact to different people, but why it's been so effective for Anne for the last 12 years is it's a story about her dad. And when she shares that story, what you see in her is pride. This isn't a company value she's towing the line for. You really see that this is important to her. If it was a story just about a random swimmer, it wouldn't have the same impact. But what it shows is Anne is a leader that is about, if we do the right thing, I'll have your back. She's not a win at all cost leader. So that story demonstrates that her leadership style, and sort of says to her team, this is what you can expect from me. Of course, the subtle message is, it's what I expect from you. The power in that story is, I now really believe that this is important to her. And of course, she has to follow through on that. So it's about being congruent. You can't tell a story like that and not believe in that.
You've mentioned that values is a really big opportunity for leaders in terms of how they communicate. You've also talked about change earlier, and we know that 70% of changes fail as well. How can storytelling be used in change? That's what I'm really curious about.
When I was a change manager back at NABS, that's when I sort of saw the power of it. Because what a story can do, it can help people think something different, feel something different, or do something different. And ultimately, in change, whether you're rolling out a new strategy or a digital transformation or a cultural transformation, you're trying to get people to do something different, like change behavior, or you're trying to get them to feel connected to what you're saying, or you're trying to get them actually to think something different. I never thought about it that way. Another story that I share in my workshop is around, I did some work with a risk team, and the head of risk, her name was Rosemary. And you're going to probably remember this story. You've done my workshop. But she said one of the biggest challenges that she has is, because she's the risk manager and she's dealing with the businesses she supports, whenever risk is raised, they go, well, you're the risk manager, that's your job. And she goes, it doesn't matter how many times I keep telling them, I cannot manage your risk for you. All I can do is help you manage the risk. But she said the behavior doesn't change. And she said, I've tried everything. I've tried providing case studies, examples, but nothing seems to work. And she pretty much tried everything except a personal story. So the story she started to share, she'd said, when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm. And growing up on a farm, there was all these dangers we needed to be aware of, but Mum would teach us what to do. So we knew what to do when we came across redback spiders in the timber heap. We knew about all the potential traps in the dam after heavy rain. And we knew what to do if we came across a snake in summer. And I remember this hot day, Mum was yelling at me to get my bike from the gate. I ran down to get my bike, and then I just froze, because in front of my bike was this massive copperhead snake. But I remembered everything Mum taught us to do. I played statues, and I slowly walked backwards until there was enough space between me and the snake, and I ran back to the house to tell Mum. And I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me of the role we play in risk. All I can do is give you the skills, knowledge, and advice when you come across your own copperhead snake. Regardless of what that looks like, you will know what to do. And what I love about that story, and when I run it, share it in my workshops, I pose 3 questions to the audience. I say, does that help you understand the message better, like the role of a risk manager and the role you play in risk? And everyone goes, yes, absolutely. And then I say, will you remember it? And they go, yes. And people will remember it because it's tapped into emotion. And then the third question is, would you be able to retell it without losing its meaning? And they sort of go, yeah. And so A personal story gives you traction on those three things: understand, remember, retell, where facts, figures, and stuff's very hard to do. So again, just highlighting you can use stories regardless of what the message is. You just gotta, the skill is trying to find the right story and then how you share it.
Yeah, I like the ease of like understanding, remembering, and retelling. And I think it all is about linking it to your key message in a meaningful way so it becomes very memorable for people, which I think is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we've all been in situations where we've communicated to our teams and we think we've communicated, and then people go, "You never told us that." It was like, this is the third time we've spoken about it. So communication, there's a great quote I love from George Bernard Shaw, and he said, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion it's taken place. And we often communicate thinking, yes, I've communicated. But if the people haven't got the message and haven't understood it, then you haven't communicated. Communication only happens when they understand it. A story can help do that.
I think that's why repetition's so key. Just because you've said it doesn't mean it's been heard. And you might need to repeat the story in different ways to make sure the message been heard, but also getting others to play back what they've heard, depending on what it is, in their own words to see whether it's actually landed for them, I think so critical, because often just we think we've said something and that it will have landed, but maybe it hasn't landed as we intended.
Yeah, I agree. Although I think story is really effective, you won't need to repeat it because people will get it straight away. It's often
Yeah.
sometimes the sort of saying, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell you what you told them. I sort
Mm.
of find that approach a little bit condescending. I was
Yeah.
sort of like, what if you shared a story and they got it straight away, first time? You wouldn't have to worry about all that. And what you do is you keep referring back to the story.
Yeah.
So, for example, the copperhead snake, Rosemary will talk about, okay, so let's identify all the copperhead snakes in the business. And the copperhead snakes becomes the metaphor. And in Anne's story about back and touch the wall, I mean, she has told me there's been times when the team are discussing what's the right thing to do. And people might go, well, legally, we're not obliged to do that. Technically, we don't have to do that. And someone will say, this is our go back and touch the wall moment. What's the right thing to do? If the story is effective, you tell it once, people understand it, but you can keep referring back to it.
Yeah. I like that, like link with metaphors to make it meaningful.
Yeah.
Well. So a couple of weeks ago, I was in Malaysia facilitating a conference, and the year before, I was with a subset of those leaders, and we'd created a strategy, and it was the first time they'd had an Asia strategy. And then we brought the leaders together, and it became really clear on the end of day one, which was focused on strategy, that the strategy hadn't necessarily landed everywhere. Like the people that were involved in creating the strategy got it, but it hadn't really percolated that well through the organization. And so we sort of flipped the agenda around a bit so that we could really focus on how do we communicate and connect our people to the strategy so they can see how they can contribute into the strategy, but also how they fit in as well to make it more meaningful. What tips or tricks do you have for leaders to really help their people understand how they fit into the strategy rather than it just being a piece of paper or something that's on a slide that's set and forget? How do you make it meaningful for leaders to be able to communicate that strategy effectively?
It's really important because you could have the best strategy in the world.
Mm.
But if your leaders can't bring it to life day in or day out, then it doesn't really matter. What I find is sometimes we have these strategy days and the leaders themselves don't really understand it. So the key is, what is it, all this about? And it's bringing elements of the strategy to life through story. So one of the biggest mistakes I see organizations make when it comes around strategy is, and some of them come to me and say, can you help us with our strategy story? We want a story that explains the strategy that all our leaders can share. And I just go, what we're going to, I go, you seriously believe there is one story that's going to communicate an entire strategy, and we're going to come up with that story, and then your leaders are going to rote learn it? It just doesn't exist and it doesn't work. So I would be pulling out elements of the strategy. What's this about? What's this about? What's this about? And having stories for each of those aspects. And you could have personal stories, but you could also have work stories as well, and why we need to do it. I also think a lot of strategy fails because we don't address some of the key issues that our employees need to hear. A lot of when we roll out strategy, we talk about all the great things that are going to happen and why this is going to be good. but we probably ignore the things like, this is actually going to be tough for a while. I mean, change is hard. We probably ignore the things that a lot of people going, why are we even changing? There's nothing wrong with what we're doing now. We're probably ignoring things that maybe people are going to lose their job out of it. You need stories around that. And I've seen the really good leaders share stories around change is tough and this is going to be tough for a while. I've seen leaders tell brilliant stories about acknowledging the fact that they're going to be redundancies and not dismissing that. I remember I worked with one leader, and this was probably about 20 years ago when I first started, and they were rolling out a change and there was going to be redundancies, and he wasn't shying away from that. I said to him, he goes, I want to be upfront about that. I go, what else do you want to be upfront about? And he goes, well, I want people to know that we're going to truly help them through redundancies and restructures. And he shared a story with me that then I said, you need to be sharing that story. And the story was, he literally said in a previous role, he had a manager that came up to him at the end of the day and said, here's a piece of paper. I want 50 names on this piece of paper who will be going, like literally listing 50 people that are going to lose their job. And he said, and if you can't find 50 people, make sure your name's on it. And he talked about how he went home and he was just like devastated that he was being treated like that and people were being treated like that. And he made a promise to himself there and then that if he was ever in a position of power like that, that he would not treat people as a number. So he shared that story. And can you see by him sharing that story, you now truly believe that you're going to be looked after. But it's the story that gives those words credibility, not just saying, oh, we will look after you, because we've all heard that before.
And I think people see through when we're always just promoting the benefits of a change or a strategy and not actually talking about the loss or the fear and actually addressing it. It feels inauthentic because it's like you're leaving the elephant in the room on the table and we're not actually talking about the whole picture of what's actually happening. And obviously we don't want to create fear where fear doesn't exist, but there will be some real fears that people are experiencing. I think we really need to be honest with acknowledging them and also sharing how that makes us feel as well. So I think the power of storytelling through that's really useful too.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was doing change management like 20, 30 years ago, it was always the burning platform, find the burning platform.
Yeah.
But that was like, this is why we need to change. And most people understand why they need to change. They just want to be acknowledged that it's still bloody tough and it's still hard and it can be emotional and stressful. So don't ignore that.
Yeah. I'm super keen to dig into your new book, Story Intelligence. So tell us a bit about what story intelligence is. How exciting. I can't wait to really dig into it. Tell us a little bit about why you wrote the book and why now.
Yeah, I've written several books on storytelling and my last one was 4 years ago and I truly believed that's it. There's only so much I can write on storytelling.
Yeah.
But it was sort of towards the end of last year, I started to have a lot of people ask me about, will AI replace storytelling? And it was like, oh, no, my God, no, AI could never replace storytelling and certainly couldn't replace your own stories. And then I had more questions about going, when you use AI for your stories, is that cheating? I'm going, no, like it's not the enemy here.
Right.
So it was probably the first time I felt compelled to write a book. And when you write a book, you never know if it's a book or it's just an article. So I started writing about it. And then I spoke to my publisher about the idea of this book. And they sort of said to me, if anyone's going to lead the conversation on storytelling and AI, it should be you. I threw myself into it. And because I truly believe we're in a world of distrust, the latest Edelman report shows that trust is at an all-time low and amongst employers too. So employers were sort of had credibility, but they're even losing credibility. So we're in a world of distrust. We're in a world of, and AI generated content, deep fakes, all that's adding to that. But we're also in a world where there is so much AI generated content that everything's starting to look the same. And I truly believe that our stories, that our personal stories are needed now more than ever. And it's what people will be really wanting, connection. So that was the reason I wrote the book. In the book, I go through the 4 types of stories. I also talk about how you can use AI as your creative partner. So how you can use AI to increase your story intelligence. You don't need to use AI. I think I'm pretty good at stories and I've been using it without AI for the last 19, well, except for the last 12 months or so. But you can use AI as your creative partner. So I take people through how you can use AI to help find these stories, even your personal stories, by getting AI to ask you questions, and then how you can use AI to refine your stories. But all the time, the critical bit is not losing your voice. So you don't want to be getting ChatGPT to write you a story and then cut and paste. You've got to maintain your voice. And I talk about, you don't let AI take control of the wheel, always be in control. Yeah, I think it's a timely book. It's really interesting when I talk about the book and people go, oh, what's it called? And I go, Story Intelligence. And they go, oh, right. And then I go, The Craft of Authentic Storytelling Made Smarter with AI. And they go, oh my God, that sounds really timely. Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Oh, it's definitely timely, that's for sure. You spoke about leaders not losing their authentic voice. And when we use large language models like ChatGPT or whatever tool you're using, sometimes it can feel like it can make you sound very vanilla.
Mhm.
What are some tips so that people don't lose their voice and maintain their authenticity when using AI as a creative partner?
Yeah, if you're using AI at all as your creative partner to like refine your story, my tip I talk about is, first of all, you should practice sharing your story. So practice sharing it out loud. And if there's any words in there that just you don't normally say or feel a little bit cliche, because that's again, like it's a dead giveaway that it comes up with cliche things, overuse of analogies, things like from credibility to confidence, from blah, blah to blah, blah. Yeah. But also in the written format, the M dash, it's just like it's a dead giveaway. How many M dashes can you have in a 3 paragraphs?
It's just funny
But
you should say that, because when I sent through the back of my book cover, because my book comes out next month in November, and one of the things that my brother said when he read it, he's like, I think you should take the two M dashes off the back page because people will think it's AI written. And I said, well, no, like the proofreaders proofed it. Like that's actually like proper English. Like that's why it's
yeah,
there. And so then I actually said to the editor, and they're like, no, we're not removing the M dashes there. They have a point and they're supposed to be there. We haven't overused M dashes, but it was just one of those things that like people won't believe that you wrote it if there's an M dash in it now.
yeah,
But it is a dead giveaway and there's a couple of other phrases I see on LinkedIn, and I'm like, as soon as I see that phrase, I'm like, oh, AI written, AI written.
yeah, yeah. I was stronger with my editors. And I think because it was a book about AI,
Yeah.
I just said, I said to my editor and the proofreaders,
Yeah.
there is not one single M dash in this book. And that they're
Oh,
going,
really? There
no,
you go.
but
Yeah.
this is like a legitimate use for it. I go, I know, and I know
Yeah.
it's going against your integrity, but just use three dots. Because I'm a fan of the three dots, the ellipse.
Yeah.
I probably overuse them, but I overuse them. Don't think there's any M dashes. Like, I don't know, maybe one or two snuck through, but they were both. It goes, as you're writing a book, it goes through several editors and a proofreader, and
Yeah.
all of them were going, but this is legitimate use. I go, I don't care. It's just use something else. Use a
Yeah.
full stop.
Oh, hilarious. Well, now literally my book's going to be arriving in 2 days. Yes. And I was like, it's too late now. I've got the M dashes in there, but no, I'm just joking. So you said before about using AI as almost like a coach, I guess, to help get the stories out of you. How do we use AI effectively to help kind of prompt or coach us to get the stories out of us that are in there?
Yeah. Well, I sort of think you could use AI instead of me. And what I mean by that is, if I was working one on one with someone and they said, oh, I want to find one of my key messages is having the courage to challenge the status quo, right? I don't know. Let's just say something like that. The first thing I would do is ask them a whole heap of questions. So I would go, okay, well, tell me a time when you didn't do that, when something went and you just let it go and something happened. Or tell me a time, did your parents instill that value in you, or did a coach, or have you got a best friend? So tell me a time when you've seen it, when you've experienced, or when you've done it yourself, or when you haven't done it yourself. So I would ask them a whole heap of questions. And then I guarantee you, part of that process is they will think of an example. They will think of a story. So you could literally use AI to say, I'm trying to find a story on courage or teamwork or whatever it is. Can you ask me 10 questions that will help me uncover my own personal story? And I almost guarantee you that process will help you uncover a story. what you then can do is, well, normally AI will say, you go, yeah, I've got one. And they'll go, just give me a few bullet points what happened. So you give it some information and then it comes back with the story. Now, that's when you've got to really go, okay, did this really happen? If it didn't, you're leaving it out. But sometimes they bring things in. I gave this as an example in my book where I tried it out, and it will add things like there was hugs, we were emotional, and I go, oh yeah, there actually were. And I hadn't put that in. But again, you don't want to lose your voice, and it's not about making stuff up. You can also use AI, like say, what I find a lot of people, they have a story and there's a danger that it's starting to feel a bit bragging. It's like when they've done the right thing, which is good, but they can be tricky to share because you don't want it to feel like it's bragging. So you can put that into AI and say, based on this story, can you ask me some questions that would make it more vulnerable or make it less preachy type thing? And use it as prompt for questions. So that's when you can use AI to help with your personal stories. And of course, the parables and the public stories, you can literally go, is there a well-known public story around teamwork? And you're going to get them. Always check for accuracy. As we know, AI hallucinates. If it doesn't know the answer, it'll make it up. So always check for accuracy.
Can I just pick up on one little thread that you mentioned there around it being braggy? And I think
Mhm.
that can also be something that stops people wanting to share stories because they don't want to sound like they're the hero.
Yep.
And I know, like in good stories, there's the hero's journey that they go on. And often when you're telling stories about other people, you make them the hero of the story. But then we don't necessarily want to appear to be the hero of our own story that we're sharing.
Mhm.
What's your view around when we're sharing personal stories where maybe we were the hero or something great happened, but we don't want to come across, and maybe it's Australian culture about tall poppy syndrome as well. Like, what's your view on the hero's journey when you're sharing a story about yourself?
Yeah. So when I talk about everyday storytelling and people go, oh, the hero's journey, I go, yeah, don't worry about it. We're not doing a Hollywood blockbuster.
Yeah.
But based on it's always best to make someone else the hero. You
Yeah.
know, when Anne's sharing a story about a dad go back and touch the wall, the dad's the hero. That's the hero in the story, not her. So that's always better if you can make someone else the hero, like the advice they gave you. If it is you doing something good, so you're the hero, you just want to spend less time on the great thing you did and more time on the self-doubt you had, the challenges you had to overcome, the lessons you learned along the way. And if you spend more time on that, it will feel less like you're bragging or look good on you. So I see that I remember one leader, she shared a story about she was faced with a really difficult decision and she made the right decision. And that's a very short version of the story, but it sounded a bit bragging. And I go, so just let me focus in on the decision making. You sort of went over that story really quickly. Like you had a challenge, you made the decision, bang. And she went, oh no. She goes, seriously, I spent days agonizing over it. Sleepless nights. I kept asking, I kept changing my mind. I go, focus on that. Bring all that in. And then it doesn't feel like it's bragging. Yeah, more time on the challenges and the hardships and the self-doubt, then it won't feel like it's bragging,
Mm.
even though you're still the hero of the story.
And it's an interesting one because I've also had feedback before, because I think I'm the type of person when I share stories on stage or when I'm facilitating where I take the piss out of myself a little bit. I try and make my stories relevant, but I did get feedback once that as a female, I shouldn't self-deprecate or put myself down. When a man does that, that's viewed as a positive, but when a female does it, you're viewed negatively. What's your view on gender and self-deprecating and those sorts of things out of curiosity?
Yeah. So one of the things I do talk about is you can do a little bit of self-deprecating humor and
Yeah.
to make it not feel like it's bragging. I think, and when we talk about gender, it's of course it's very general. I think
Yeah.
women tend to do it more because they don't like. So I don't want to sound like I'm bragging. Was just like okay. Well, the moment you're so aware you don't want to sound like you're bragging, you probably won't. So women tend to do it more. So I can understand that feedback of do it less, but also Australians do it a lot. So Australians do it like I give people advice if they're Australians and they're speaking in the US, for example, is like don't ever use self-deprecating humor because people were going, why are you doing that? So it's a nationality thing too. And I see it a lot in Australian and New Zealand. And I think because Australian and New Zealanders, there is that tall poppy syndrome that we feel the need to like bring it down a bit by self-deprecating humor. But I agree. Don't do it. Don't do it. Certainly don't do it as much.
Yeah. So my book that's coming out is called Thriving Teams. And I do think storytelling plays a really key role within teams, whether that's to build psychological safety or trust, or even talk about the journey the team's been on and the narrative, especially when there's new team members coming and going and kind of sharing that history. What do you see as the role of storytelling in high-performing teams?
Oh, that's exactly that. So if you want to, like, first of all, what does high performing mean? It's giving all those messages. And you can imagine a high performing team is challenging the status quo and doing all that. Like as a leader, you need a story for each of those elements of whatever a high performing team is. But it's like the story I shared, Anne's story about go back and touch the wall. Because she truly is that, it gives people permission straight away to do the right thing. Stories are just critical for any leader to be sharing with their team.
And even just encouraging team members to share their stories too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if every listener took one kind of small step to boost their story intelligence, what would you recommend?
Well, besides reading my book.
Yeah, of course. That's the number one thing. Yeah,
of course. And I say that half jokingly because there is a skill involved in this. So I've seen, if I sort of said here, just tell a story, it might fail. And the danger of that is just tell a story and it doesn't work. And then people go, well, I tried it and it didn't work. And then I look at it, it was like, yeah, well, you went too long. It was the wrong story for the wrong message, all that type of stuff. So it is a skill. Like, no doubt, it's a very powerful communication skill. It's a very powerful influencing skill, but it's a skill. Some people, like any other skill, some people will be better at it than others. But if you learn how to do it and if you practice it, you will get better at it. Invest the time in learning how to do it well and practicing it and then giving it a go then.
Awesome. And the final question that I ask all of our podcast guests is, if you could leave our listeners with one message about thriving teams, what would it be?
I would say, and it's probably a lesson I've lived my life on, I don't know what the key to success is, but the key to failure is trying to please everybody.
It's really powerful. Yeah.
Mm.
I think also, if you think about that in the context of storytelling, I think sometimes we can have people-pleasing stories that we tend to lean on as well to appease people, but also the fact that teamwork's hard and not everyone's going to be happy all the time.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Rel. I've got some little tips that I'll take with me, especially in the work that I do to tell better stories. And I just want to say a huge thank you for your time today. So all the
Thanks.
best.
I always love the opportunity to spread the message on the power of storytelling.
Yes. And Story Intelligence is coming out in November, so get your copy too. All right. Thanks, Rel. What really stayed with me from this conversation is Rel's invitation to choose effective over easy. In leadership, communication isn't just about relaying information, it's about connection, and stories are the bridge. Whether you're navigating change, embedding values, or just trying to make strategy stick, your personal stories matter more than you think. They humanise you, build trust, and create the kind of clarity people remember. So here's my encouragement to you. The next time you hesitate to share a story because it feels too small or too personal, remember this: those are often the ones that resonate the most. Thanks, Rel, for all your insights. Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, including our Thriving Leaders program, Thriving Women in Leadership and Thriving Teams, as well as executive and team coaching, keynote speaking or facilitation, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful leadership and team development insights and tools, as well as our podcast. You can also grab your copy of my book, Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently. It's also available at all good online retailers, on Audible, Spotify and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive.